Linehan, culture editor of the Irish Times, and Aingeala, Flannery, producer of Neil Delamere's Sunday Best here on Today FM, are with us because the Church of Scientology has opened a new National Affairs office in Dublin. Angela, what's that when it's at home?
It seems to be a corporate office, Matt, because what it's got is 5 senior members from Sea Org, and Sea Org is like an upper echelon within the Church of Scientology.
Sort of the Vatican of it?
Well, I think like the celebs that we know that are in the Church of Scientology would be in Sea Org. Sort
of the Tom Cruises, John Travolta's.
Yeah, exactly. Kirstie Alley, and then there was another woman whose name escapes me, Leah. She was Leah Rimini, who actually famously left the Church of Scientology and sort of wrote a tell-all book about it. She would have been in Sea Org as well. Now, of course, Scientologists have been in Dublin since the late 80s, and actually I ran into them in the late 80s when they opened on Middle Abbey Street. Like, not literally ran up the stairs into their office, but bumped into them, as many people would have walking down Abbey Street at that time. I was doing my undergraduate degree in Maynooth, and our bus stop, the 66 bus and the 67A used to leave from Abbey Street, and it used to go every hour. So if you were late at all and you missed the bus or it was full, you'd have to hang around Abbey Street for an hour. And you would be approached by the same person all the time.
And you get your personality test offered to you.
Free personality test.
Free personality test, exactly. And the thing is that nobody in Ireland at the time, and this is 1988, 89, I would have been like 18 or 19 at the time, and nobody knew what Scientology was. There was no mention of it being a religion. It was all about, are you interested in reading and in philosophy and psychology? Would you like to come in, or would you like to stand on the cold for an hour waiting for the 66? Sure, I might as well come in and have a chat with you, and you go up, and I left halfway through because I just thought, this is nonsense, the questions are daft, and anyway, the bus will be here, come back, but afterwards, talking to friends of mine who'd gone to college with me, a lot of them did exactly the same thing. So an awful lot of people would have gone into this place on Abbey
Street. How many signed up?
Well, I don't think that many did, because we don't have exact numbers of how many there are in Ireland. Apparently there's about 50,000 members of the church and it is described as a church there in the United States, and about 100,000 worldwide, which really in global terms is not very, is not very big in terms of cults or sects or anything like that. But they have a huge profile for a number of reasons, and one is, as Angela says, that they specifically go out. They have a specific department that goes out that tries to convert or inveigle or recruit celebrities. So they're the ones. The most famous ones, obviously, are Travolta and Tom Cruise. But there are people like the singer Beck is a Scientologist. Elizabeth Moss, who you might remember, plays Peggy in Mad Men. She's a Scientologist. There's quite a number of people, so they do hang around in Hollywood quite a lot.
And what's the harm of Scientology?
Well, indeed, and if you look at it, it's on one level it just seems deeply, deeply silly. And as you say, what's the harm? They believe in some strange kind of a theory about extraterrestrials and different levels of humanity, and people who were beamed up from a spaceship at some point in the past. In fact, there is what is broadly regarded in many circles as one of the worst films ever made, was a film called Battlefield Earth, which is really based on the theology of Scientology, which starred John Travolta and was released in 2000, and I think won more golden raspberries than any other film has ever done. So on that level, what the harm? It's just a bit of silliness. It's just another kind of harmless kind of cult. On another level, I think if you look at the history of it going all the way back to the 1950s, there is a pattern of certain kinds of behaviour which has got the organisation into trouble in countries around the world, including the United States, where more than a dozen senior members were jailed in the early 1980s for carrying out, essentially infiltrating or attempting to infiltrate the American government, which is pretty creepy.
And there's also a war against psychiatry, isn't there?
Well, yes, there is, because the thing is when the book Dianetics came out first, which is L. Ron Hubbard's book, the one they try to flog you if you go into Abbey Street, and it was actually on the New York Times bestseller list, and people looked at it, and psychiatrists and people who were involved in therapy had a look at it, and it was kind of it was debated probably in polite society. People bought it and all of this, but then they kind of started saying, well, it's pop psychology really, and this row broke out. And I don't know if you've ever heard Tom Cruise going on about how he feels about psychiatry. He doesn't believe in it, thinks it's rubbish, like antidepressants or manipulating people, all this sort of thing. But actually, if you look at what Scientology does, you go in, you do this personality test that reveals apparently a lot about you, and then if you join the church, or even if you don't, you're subjected or you give into this process called auditing, which is essentially sitting down and having counselling where you go in and you look at all of the damage in your past and past lives and you come out with this. So you reveal yourself. In your
past and past lives.
Oh yeah, because the thing is they believe utterly in reincarnation, that we're we're souls that are reincarnated over and over and over again. And we are, as Hugh says, 75 million years old, and we all go back to this guy who's a bit like sort of Ming the Merciless, who basically, Zenu is his name.
There is a real comic strip element to a lot of this stuff.
The volcano on the front of the Dianetics. It does have its roots
in trashy sci-fi novels of the 1950s.
He wrote sci-fi novels. He was a sci-fi novelist.
This is the founder, L. Ron Hubbard, who actually had an office in 69 Merrion Square, apparently, in the 1950s.
Yes, apparently so. You know, I mean, it's a long and tortuous history. And again, it does sound like a bit of fun. But then when you look at some of their principles or their philosophies, some of them are kind of scary. One is they have an idea that a certain percentage of the world's population are what they call suppressives, which is really evil people who they can do whatever they want to because they are enemies of the faith as they see it. And they have another process which they call fair game. And what fair game means is they can target people who they see as enemies, and they will use whatever means necessary, and that can include everything from the courts to much more nefarious kinds of things. So
we better stop now.
Well, people who have investigated them, the former BBC journalist John Sweeney, for example, made a very powerful documentary and followed it up with a book, I think, about Scientologists. And he was harassed. He was subject to surveillance. There were attempts to smear his name, and those kind of patterns of behaviour in regard to people who've tried to expose the activities of Scientology recur again and again and again. I have to say, my experience as a journalist is whenever I've been even slightly associated with some coverage of Scientology, all of a sudden you get a sense that you're being watched, and I'm not being paranoid about that.
Well, the other thing about it is that they're known to be very, very litigious. Now, I certainly had an experience as a journalist of interviewing somebody and having to drop the interview because they made such not outrageous, but very serious allegations that we couldn't substantiate, that I'd no idea whether or not they were true, and that you just wouldn't, as a responsible journalist, broadcast. But there is one thing about them, like how no matter what way they use the law, or you talk about them going to court, they underpin this thing called the inalienable rights that they have. And there's loads of these inalienable rights. Inalienable rights are natural laws, which is kind of the way that we would have complained about canon law. They supersede the laws of any government and any culture. And that's, those are what their tenets are, inalienable rights.
And the counter argument to all of this, of course, is that a lot of what they do is what a lot of churches and other religious sects have done over centuries.
Hugh Linehan, I know you have to leave us, so I'll let you go. But Angela, I just want to check one last thing with you. This building apparently was bought for €2 million, and they've put more money going into it. But is Scientology in Ireland regarded as a church or a charity or a business? Is there a tax advantage perhaps for them being located in Ireland, just like foreign multinationals come and locate here?
Well, there is a suggestion that if they could, there was an article in the Times over the weekend where a former member of the church was suggesting that what they're trying to do is cozy up to politicians because they'd like to be seen as a religion, obviously for tax purposes, because, if you're a religious or a charitable foundation, your treatment is very different than if you're a business. At the moment, they are considered a business or a company. They have directors, and their latest accounts that I read about anyway show that they were operating at a loss. Now, this house cost, I think, it's
over 2 million.
Yeah, so obviously that money didn't come from Ireland, but they have of late in Ireland been saying that they are going to help with all of these drug rehabilitation programs, etc., and they're trying to ingratiate themselves in that way. There was a report in the Times that said that they approached the John Hearn down in Waterford, who's Waterford City Mayor, saying would he come to this event. There was a jive band or a swing band at it, and it was all about getting involved in local community groups and helping to wipe out a drugs problem. He didn't know who they were because it was a front group that approached him, who told him he may be approached by Scientologists but not to worry about it. And then he says that afterwards he got many phone calls. That's another thing about the Church of Scientology, is that it appears in many different guises, usually around sort of businesses, around community groups, around drugs, around all sorts of human rights groups that actually on the face of it you would not necessarily know they were Scientologists.
Aingeala Flannery, thank you very much for joining us. The listener says, in a former life I believed in reincarnation, but not now anymore. Hugh Linehan was with us as well.